I will introduce you to the different philosophical topics related to human freedom. Some questions answered includes what blocks our freedom and how should we exercise our freedom. First, I will give you the definition of freedom. Freedom in a political and social context means the freedom of an individual from oppression, compulsion, or coercion from other persons, such as an authority figure or from society itself. So, liberty or freedom is a social and political concept that has a great significance on how people participate in society. During the Age of Enlightenment in 18th century Europe, the concept of freedom emerged as an important philosophical issue. Intellectuals pondered the origins of society and the state, as well as the nature of human freedom during this time period. So early man, according to Enlightenment thinkers, existed in a nature state and had complete freedom. However, the establishment of societies required people to give up some of their liberties in order to live in harmony with others and ensure society's survival. So people entered into a social contract when establishing society, which defined the freedoms they would have as members of the society and the state. So, now that there are two types of liberties: the positive liberty, which refers to a person taking control of his or her own life and fulfilling one's potential. And the negative liberty is the freedom from external restraints, barriers, and other interferences from other people. A variety of ideas about human liberty influenced the development of a number of political ideologies. Here are some of the ideologies and views. Liberalism upholds the preservation of individual rights and stresses the role of government in protecting these civil liberties. Libertarianism, on the other hand, believes that the individual, not the government, is the best judge in upholding and exercising rights. So socialism considers freedom to acquire economic resources and the ability to work and act according to one's desires. Then next is the theological views, which defines freedom from sin and living a life of righteousness. So Christians define freedom in the context of living in accordance with the will of God. Okay, natural and legal rights. So freedom also entails the recognition of certain rights and entitlements of persons. Natural rights refers to rights which are innate in the person, such as the right to life. So these rights are considered universal and inalienable. Okay, next is the legal rights. They are rights that are based on society's customs and laws and are enacted by legislation and enforced by a government. So the enjoyment of this right is based on citizenship. So citizens, as Filipino citizens, have different benefits compared to foreigners who come here. It is the same for Filipinos if they go to another country. What makes us free? How does freedom shape our experience? Freedom in its simplest sense is the freedom to make choices in life. So where you are currently now in life is usually the result of your decisions or the decisions of those older than you, such as your guardians or parents. Those decisions are usually influenced by several factors such as culture, and what you decide for your life from now on will be where you will be in the future. And I sure do hope everyone strives for a better future or a better life. So I bet you are most likely young. So remember that there are so many possibilities in life. Look at the video. So back to the topic, philosophers relate human freedom to the concept of human agency, which refers to the capacity of a person to act and exert control over his or her behavior. So human freedom is expressed in two ways: free will and free action. So free will, which is the capacity to choose from alternative courses of action or decision. Okay, then free action is the freedom to perform an action without any obstacles or hindrances. Here are uh, Other models and views about human free will. Philosophers identify various ways that people can exercise free will and free action. These perspectives emphasize different views regarding the nature of free will and how it will influence human action. So, the faculties model. It refers to free will as the use of our mental capacities. It assumes that we have free will due to our intellect and that each human action is based on rationality and sound judgment. An example of that would be a student deciding to participate actively in class to improve his or her grades. It indicates that or she uses judgment to implement an action, thus exercising free will. Next is the hierarchical model. It argues that free will is based on human wants and desires. An individual is faced with various wants and desires that need to be met. Okay, a person who exercises free will when he or she identifies one desire as acceptable and decides to act upon it. So, for example, a newly graduated high school student who decides to pursue either automotive or information technology in college is exercising free will. They choose, or should he or she choose automotive, he or she must want to become an automotive technician, or if he or his subsequent actions to enroll in the college of information technology and devote his or her efforts to studies indicate that he freely and voluntarily made this decision out of his own free will. The third is the resonance responsive view, and it believes that man has a free will because he or she is able to entertain reasons not to enact a certain decision and act upon them when the need arises. For example, a person decides to cross the street but sees a car rapidly approaching. He exercises free will by choosing not to cross the street and allow the speeding car to pass. So, what can prevent us from exercising our freedom? Human freedom, however, has its constraints. Constraint means a limitation or restriction. So, internal constraints, it refers to the action or interventions that restrict free will. Remember the definition of free will and compare it to the free action. Next is the external constraints. External constraints means physical limitations. Constraints on free action include external obstacles such as prohibitions, laws, and other social controls imposed by society. A person can also be physically prevented from performing an action by disability or sickness or by coercion by another exerted by another person. So other external factors that may restrict free action include weather, accidents, or poverty. Constraints on free will include certain methods that cloud a person's judgment, such as manipulation and brainwashing. People can also be coerced to perform against the rule. Considering these constraints, it is then possible for people to exercise their free will but are prevented to engage in free action. For instance, in the Philippines, many want to go home to their provinces or during the long weekend, but they had to cancel their plans at the last minute because of the storm specifically playing. So, in a deterministic worldview, philosophers also pondered how free will can be exercised in a seemingly deterministic world. So, again, it was discussed previously that determinism is a philosophical view that believes that every event in the world is brought about by underlying causes or factors. So, and it relates to the destiny. Okay, if man is indeed free, how can he exercise his free will and action in a world where events are already determined by outside forces? So, various explanations have been proposed in order to reconcile free will with determinism. With determinism. So, the generally accepted view is that man possesses free will and is able to exercise it in many situations. An example of free will being exercised in a deterministic perspective is how people deal with things that are outside of their control. For instance, a young person may struggle with his or family's decision to move to resist change. Another example is how people deal with tragic news of an impending loss. So a person diagnosed with a terminal illness cannot do anything to reverse his situation, but he can choose to live out his remaining moments in a dignified, calm manner. So other views contend that there is now free will and that all things are determined by underlying causes. Many philosophers who believe this point to underlying influence in society that unconsciously shape our idea and action. The things we say or do, to a certain extent, are influenced by our socioeconomic situation, our culture, and the people whom we have been interacting with throughout our lives. So this is most evident in Marxist philosophy that believes that society imposes certain controls on people, and that a person's social group largely influences how he or she thinks or acts. This view believes that man is essentially constrained by society. So the issue between free will and determinism is also important in theology. Theologians discuss free will against the concept of an omniscient God. Most theologians agree that God, despite being all knowing, grants us the ability to choose our actions. God's grace enables us to be guided towards welfare, growth, and salvation. So, how can we effectively exercise freedom in our life? The concept of moral responsibility is an effective guide in the proper exercise of human freedom. So, moral responsibility refers to a person's status of deserving praise and reward, or blame and punishment for an action. So, free will is necessary for moral responsibility. Should there be impediments or constraints to free will, a person is held to not be morally responsible for his or her actions. Assuming that almost all of our actions are essentially free, we as a persons have to confront the moral responsibility of our actions. So actions produce consequences. In Newton's third law of action, it says, for every action or force in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So our good actions, such as helping people in need or fulfilling our responsibilities, will merit praise and reward. On the other hand, should we do actions which run counter to social norms and laws and cause harm to others, you run the risk of facing negative consequences of our action. So Christian doctrine establishes that all good moral actions will result in rewards such as blessing and salvation, while evil deeds merit punishments both in this world and in afterlife. Next would be control and regulation. So control and regulation are necessary elements in the responsible exercise of freedom. In the face of social situations and moral dilemmas, an individual may consider alternative choices, refrain from doing this or her intended action, and even act differently from his or her intended choice. For example, a person who discourages friends from skipping classes just because they felt like it is exercising freedom with control and regulation. So a person who chooses not to join his barkada who engage in vices such as excessive drinking also shows responsible exercise of freedom. So our interaction with other people in society is also an important influence in the proper exercise of freedom. So adopting the concepts of social contract, we assume that human freedom can be exercised under certain constraints or limits. Thus our decisions and actions should be done in consideration of the established norms and laws of society and the general welfare. So a responsible member of society should also uphold not only his or her own individual rights, but also the rights and liberties of other people.